everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. The ARC of California is thrilled to offer Caring Futures, a proven resource program dedicated to supporting caregivers and family members of adults with disabilities. Understanding the unique challenges faced by family caregivers as they age, Caring Futures offers critical planning assistance, resources, and a supportive community. Caring Conversations is just one part of the Caring Futures program here at the ARC of California. We will share more about our other offerings by Caring Futures at the end of today's conversation, so please stay tuned. As you see, we have ASL interpretation for our discussion today. You can turn on closed captioning by clicking the button in the bar below. At the end of today's conversation, there will be a question and answer session. At that time, we'll invite you to raise your hand or type your question in the Q&A to ask our guests directly. Hello, everyone. My name is Felisa Strickland. I'm a proud sole parent caregiver for my daughter, Lily. Lily is 24 years old. She has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, and IDD, and she requires full-time care. We enjoy our life, and we live in Santa Barbara, California. Alongside full-time caregiver, I am a strong advocate for individuals with disabilities. I serve as a board member for the ARC of California, as well as Alpha Resource Center of Santa Barbara. I also participate in many committees and enjoy getting involved in fundraisers and advocacy projects in our community. As a Caring Futures instructor and a parent educator, I am thrilled to be here for this important conversation with you and our special guest. Today's topic is supported decision-making, empowering choice and honoring individual will, exploring practical steps to center will, preference, and dignity. Joining us for our conversation today is Elizabeth Moran. Elizabeth Moran, JD, serves as Executive Director for the ARC of Colorado, where she brings extensive lived experience and professional background working in legislation and public policy addressing disability rights across the lifespan, specifically rights related to IDD, TBI, and cognitive disabilities associated with aging. Elizabeth serves on the Colorado Governor's Disability Rights Task Force, the ARC U.S. Legal Advocacy Committee, and is editor-facilitator of the NGA's Legal and Legislative Review on Guardianship. Prior to joining the ARC Colorado team, Elizabeth served as chief counsel at the ABA Commission on Law and Aging, where she provided substantive support and expertise on law, policy, practice, and reform in the areas of guardianship, supported decision-making, adult capacity, and abuse, neglect, and exploitation of individuals with disabilities, impacting their ability to effectively communicate. She also previously served as Deputy Director of the Missouri Developmental Disabilities Council and Chair of Missouri's Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Elizabeth is a sibling of an individual with an IDD diagnosis and daughter of a parent diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. She is passionate in her efforts to promote and protect the human rights, will, preferences, and the dignity of choice for individuals with cognitive disabilities. Without further ado, please welcome Elizabeth.
Thank you, Felisa. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. This is such an important topic, and you sound like just the person to get us started on explaining it and exploring it. So I'm so happy you're here with us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Before we move on and into more in-depth conversation about supported decision-making, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, your family, and maybe why you're so passionate about this work?
You bet. So, I came into this field. So I'm a sibling. I have a older sister who has a developmental disability, and then also just specifically around supported decision making, just some of the experience that I've had in my personal life with my grandmother who had Alzheimer's and now my father who has Alzheimer's. But I will tell you, growing up, disability was just a natural part of my life, right? Because my sister, with her friends, who by extension were also my friends and our sort of our extended family, it was a very natural part of our life. Disability and accommodations and understanding that people are not always what we call traditional communicators, right? So lots of friends who are either nonverbal or difficult to understand. And we sort of just made our way through that. Like we figured out what those supports and accommodations look like, and we figured out how to communicate with people, and we figured out how to give them voice. But what I realized is most of that was happening in my personal life. And so when I graduated from law school, this semester I graduated from law school, I had been hired by a land use and property law firm to do a lot of litigation. And then I had sort of a niche practice on the side that was really advocating for disability rights under the ADA, disability rights under IDEA, under FAPE 504, transition planning, that was sort of my primary focus. And then my sister became the victim of a sexual assault by a family member, not my immediate family, my extended family. And as I watched her go through victim supports, I watched her navigate the justice system. We really started having conversations in our internal world, right, about what does communicating effectively, particularly under the ADA, what does that look like? What are supports that need to be in place to make sure that my sister was able to engage in a really meaningful way about the decisions that were being made about her life? So not just law and not just in that justice system, but in her everyday services, supports, where did she want to live, who she wanted to live with, who were her friends, how did they, that we had to really empower her and also give her the tools that she would need to have that dignity of choice and really honoring her will and preference, and making her a part of those decision-making processes to the extent we could. And then I also feel compelled to add this piece too. I think it's a myth. So some folks have said, oh, well, didn't she have a guardian? She didn't when this happened. But also recognizing that the elephant in the room, I think, for all things around guardianship and supported decision making and powers of attorney and where we live and how we support people, that that there really isn't anything that's 100% protective. And even if she had a guardian in place at that time, it would not have prevented the assault. And also, it would have made her less able to engage in the justice system because under the law, she would have been deemed incapacitated. So for us, it was actually better, and it was better for her to have a supported decision-making model in her life where she was supported in making those decisions and could demonstrate that she did have the ability, whether to consent or not. And even though that happened in the context of a criminal action, I think that applies to lots of other things where we question whether or not someone has the capacity to make decisions, to consent, to weigh in, so forth and so on. So that for me was a turning point in my career. And I shifted from doing one kind of law completely over and left everything else behind and really started doing advocacy work, particularly in the IDD community, but as you very generously read my very long bio, but also when I was in DC working for the Commission on Law and Aging, and looking at nothing but guardianship, supported decision-making, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of people who are aging. And I always tell people, if you're over the age of 18, you're an adult. And if you're lucky enough to not have passed on, you are aging. We're all aging. So really, it's the whole population of folks who have some level of disability that impacts their cognitive abilities. So that's the lens I try to bring. So part of it's family, part of it's sort of my law background, and then part of it's just a deep-rooted passion I have for making sure that we really are giving people the opportunity to live with equity.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that background. That's really, really amazing. And it is, yeah, I find too that a lot of times something going on in our personal life and experience or what have you really does shape and mold where we're going to move forward in some area of our life. And it sounds like yours is really, it comes from the heart, and that's really powerful. So thank you for that. I love that perspective, and thank you for sharing your sister's story as well. And it really helps put things into context. So thank you for that. Your lived experience is so valuable in this conversation. How has supported decision-making impacted your relationship with your sister, as well as your parent that needs support? And would you mind sharing some examples of what that looks like for your family?
You bet. So, you know, I'm going to start with my sister because she's my older sister. And I think there was a point in our life where I realized that I was able to make decisions and do things that she wasn't. Not because she couldn't, but because she just never been given the opportunity to make the same kinds of decisions, some of them bad decisions, that we made. She's 7 years older than I am, and so there reached a point I think where I was old enough to recognize that people talking about her, but not necessarily to her, us making the assumption that she didn't understand, or my mother would tell you in hindsight, making decisions for her that she didn't fully appreciate that my sister wanted to be a part of. But because she was invited to the table, but never invited necessarily to the conversation and supported in a way that she could meaningfully engage in those conversations. So some examples, I remember when my sister first wanted to drive, and my parents said that's an ambitious goal, right? We're not sure what that might look like and whether or not that would be safe for you or for anyone else. And I will tell you, it was something that she set her mind to, and she didn't do it at 16. She didn't do it at 18, at 20. She didn't do it for a while, but she actually was able. And the agreement they had is if you can pass the driver's license test, right? And you'll have to get we'll have to figure out how to pay for a car and gas and insurance and all of those things. And so that became a mechanism by which she could learn about money and responsibility and how to do things. And she eventually did get her driver's license. And I should put this caveat here. Most of us get in our car, most of us who don't identify as a person with a disability that would prevent us from driving, we get in our car and we just go someplace. It's a little different for her. It's very planned out. She doesn't know how to use an app to follow directions. She doesn't. So where she goes is very, very, very limited. It's to things like from where she lives, and she has a roommate who is similarly situated, but she can now drive from where she lives, for instance, to the food pantry and back. And that's been incredibly empowering for her. And she doesn't do it during bad weather. She doesn't do it during rush hour. She doesn't go out after dark. She doesn't, right, so forth and so on. But it's enabled her to, because she was able to pass and she was able to do that, and it took her a long time, it's given her freedom and choice that she wouldn't have otherwise had. I'll give you another example, because this is one that my family set up a special needs trust for my sister because she does not have a guardian. My family feels very strong that as long as she is able to communicate who she wants to help support her and help make those decisions, that's not something that we want to do. We don't want to make her a ward of the state, because essentially that's what guardianship does, right? And then it gives the care and custody of someone. And I think in California, if I'm not mistaken, it's a conservatorship that most of us call, a lot of other states call guardianship, and whereas in California it's conservatorship. So she is, over time, this wasn't one conversation, but we were able to help her understand there are two ways that we felt it was very important to provide her the supports that she needed, just to navigate not just daily life, but also just the bigger, more important decisions around money and medical care. And she doesn't fully appreciate government benefits and systems and how that all works. And but she is able to understand that a guardianship is taking away her rights and giving them to someone else. The court decides, makes a decision, and there's a court order, or she can choose who those folks are, understanding that if those are people that the team she cares about believe are putting her at risk or putting others at risk of abuse, neglect, fraud, exploitation, that there will be some interventions in place to help her understand who has her best interest at heart, right? Because it can be scary to think that if there's not a guardian, there's not someone like one person charged with oversight, that it's a team of people, which I would argue actually makes her more safe, because there's more eyes and ears on her. There's more people sort of involved in her life, which she had when she was in school. But once she transitioned out of the school setting, she had far fewer eyes and ears on her. So we have been able to create a team of people that she chooses, And we look at that team periodically with her to ask her, are these still the people that you choose? Are these still the people that you would like? And we have open conversations about why it's important to have certain kinds of people who understand her life. But back to the trust. There were things that were really important to her. So she has, and I'll tell you, she has since quit smoking, but she was a smoker to the behest of everyone around her who thought it was unhealthy. She was putting herself at risk for lung cancer, for heart disease, for all kinds of things. Um, and my mom felt particularly strong that in her trust and that money, if she chose to continue smoking, we would continue to explain to her the risks. And she fully appreciated that it could be deadly. She's had family members who have died of lung cancer. But it's also one of the very few things that she has control over, that she can do it anytime she wants, however she wants. But I will share with you, she recently had a stroke and had a phenomenal doctor who was able to explain to her in very plain language that that stroke was caused because she wasn't taking her blood pressure medicine. She had been smoking and it had thinned out, right? The lining of her, where the blood flow, the lining was very thin. And then when you couple that with high blood pressure, that's what causes. So she was able to understand that she had to take her medication. She really needed to quit smoking and she needed healthy eating habits. So we set her up with a team, again, sort of a supported decision-making team on her health. And so she has someone who advises her on nutrition, someone who helps her. She can call and talk about things, but she's quit smoking. She eats a very healthy diet. She walks every day, and she's probably healthier than she's ever been in her entire life. And so by putting supports and people in place and making it a combination of paid supports, natural supports, friends that she chooses, that everyone plays a different role and she's able to get those needs met. So we're very lucky that way. And with my father, it's quite different. He has Alzheimer's, so he is declined, where my sister has learned new skills and been able to identify folks and gotten much better at identifying folks who maybe don't have her best interest at heart and being able to tap in. My father's, it's different, but it really is about setting up a team of folks who know him well when that's available, understanding that not everyone is in that ideal situation, and making sure that his will and preference is honored, knowing what his values are, knowing what his routines are, talking to him like an adult because he is an adult, and really honoring that his brain is just wired differently now, right? And it's honoring that dignity of choice still, even in those moments when he doesn't remember, even in those moments where he's asking the same question multiple times, even in those moments when we don't think he's making good choices, honoring that dignity of choice so that he's living the highest quality of life that he can. And right now he's in our home, so which is a very beautiful and fortunate thing.
Yeah, well, and for both your sister and for your father, you still want to allow them that opportunity to make some decisions for themselves. And especially in your sister's case, giving her those opportunities to make choices and suffer the consequences, whatever they may be, or, it's, say for example, she makes good choices, that's a good feeling, right? Like that feeling of I made a good choice. And then there's also the issue of I didn't make such a good choice, and this is what happens when I don't make a good choice. But
Mhm.
giving that opportunity, leaving that opportunity in place, I think is really powerful, right? That's a big part of living for all of us. And we want that to be the case for our family members, right? That we're caring for. Just because your dad thinks differently and does things differently and doesn't understand or remember things the same way doesn't mean that he's not the same person that he's always been. He's still that person. And so he still wants to have that feeling of being that same person. He doesn't want to feel like that people see him differently, even if there's reason for it. If that's not the way you want him to feel, right?
That's right. And you bring up a great point about the bad, making bad choices. And, when I talk to by the way, I should share this with you and your audience. I have permission from my sister and my father and anyone I talk about, I have permission to share those stories because
Okay.
yeah, you know, one of the things my mother has shared with me, she's now in her 80s, is that um, she regrets that she didn't have my sister start making decisions, whether they were good or bad or otherwise, much, much earlier. Because she took a very, at the time, sort of a protective parental, I want to protect her from making bad decisions. And because she felt like my sister, because of her disability, had enough on her plate. She had enough challenges, enough, you know, struggles with building social capital for doing things that maybe weren't popular or didn't kind of fit the social norms, or and that she wishes in hindsight she would have given her the opportunity to make some of those choices, that even if they were bad choices and there were consequences, it didn't, she was also, because not giving her the opportunity to make those choices, she also was taking away that opportunity to learn, and sort of making the assumption that
Exactly.
I'm just going
Yeah.
to prevent it from happening, and then that way that protects her, but in the long run then it also took away the learning component to build on that, right? So over time, yeah.
Yeah, and you place those, and not that people, not that parents or family members are doing it intentionally, trying to not presume competence or take away, experiences. There's just that, you know, lack of clarity as to what's the best thing to do. And I think that, we want to assume that people can learn and people can grow and, how whatever that looks like at whatever pace, and so yeah, that's what I love about supported decision making. My daughter and I, that's the method that we use, and I've learned a lot by just allowing certain choices to stand and not having to put my 2 cents in. And it's like, that's not what I want you to do, but I'm going to go with it. And it looks different for every family. But so, for many years, conservatorship has been the go-to and still is probably for most families in terms of, putting some safeguards in place. But how does supported decision making serve as an alternative to conservatorship? And also, can they be used together? I mean, do you have to have one or the other, or is it something that, is part of the process both ways?
It's both. So it's a great question, because I think sometimes I think there are times when supported decision making has been presented as it is just it is an alternative to guardianship, and that's sort of the only way it works. And so I see it, and I think there is a national movement around saying, um, yes, it is an alternative to conservatorship, and it is a practice that can be used within the context of a guardianship or conservatorship, to better increase the individual's involvement, to honor their will and preference more, to learn, to use it as a tool to learn, so that if at some point, let's say a guardianship absolutely is warranted right now, or a conservatorship right now, but the ultimate goal is to either reduce that as time goes on, or to something that is either limited or temporary, or to seek a restoration at some point down the line, because the individual has been able to, for instance, in my sister's case, had she had a guardianship early on when she turned 18, I suspect that over time, as her skills built, somewhere in her mid-30s or so, my parents probably would have filed for a restoration to have it removed. So it's both. So it is a practice that honors the person and the dignity of choice and the liberty of that person. And it's something that can be used as an alternative, particularly when we start talking about supported decision-making teams or supported decision-making agreements. And we start looking at sort of more of the technical side of it or legal side of it. Many states have passed supported decision-making agreements into law. I'm from Colorado. Colorado has a supported decision-making statute. Other states like Maryland have passed supported decision-making where it can be an agreement. It can also just be a practice that someone has, a team of people that they've built that doesn't have necessarily a formal, like a form they fill out, but it's understood, and it certainly is reduced to writing in some way, so that if somebody comes in, they can say, oh, I understand that this person has, much like an agency agreement under the law, given the authority to that person to help them out. But it's not necessarily a formalized legal document. In the context of guardianship and conservatorship, I just think that it's best practice, right?
Yes,
It's
I mean,
best
it really
practice.
is. And you can start it as early as, kindergarten.
You
It
should. I
doesn't.
would argue
Yeah,
you should because
yeah.
we we talk a lot about how my sister, she's a pleaser, but she's been conditioned to be a pleaser where she tries to, you ask her a question and it's almost like you can see her wheels, like she's trying to figure out, is that the right answer? Now if my mom is in the room, I told this story just recently, if my mom is in the room, she'll often just turn and look at my mom to say, what's the answer, what's the right answer, right? But if you see my sister, bellied up to a pub, with some of her friends, she doesn't need anyone to cue her on what the answers are to things. Um, but if you give her that opportunity, had she had that opportunity, I think longer ago, she wouldn't have been quite as conditioned to look for the right answer, right? Because I think it would have
But
been,
to trust her own instinct, right? She would,
yes,
yeah. And
yes.
that's what we really want for all of our kids, right? Or all of our family members. We want them through process and experience, have that feeling of, I can do it. I can do it.
That's right. And I think, when we think about supported decision making, both in the context of within a conservatorship, but also as a standalone thing that we do completely isolated from conservatorship, it could be as an alternative. It might just be something we're practicing to see whether or not we even need a conservatorship, right?
Exactly.
But it really is just a way to help people make their own decisions and stay in charge of their lives, but receiving the help that they need to do so, right? It's
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that and doing it so eloquently. You talked about a formal process. So, like for example, my daughter Lily and I, we have an appointment of a personal representative, and it's just a brief form. I got it from the local Family Resource Center, and it basically just says that she has chosen me to make decisions that she may not understand thoroughly or doesn't want to make, or it just it gives me that permission from her very specifically, and it's signed by her, until she decides otherwise. And she can change that at some point too, if she wants to. So clarifying that's good. Is there a formal process? Do you know in the states that have supported decision making, is there a formal process that people should consider if they would like to explore that more?
So yes and no. So it depends on the state, that specific state's law, if it's in place. If it's not in place, then what I always recommend is folks go to the National Supported Decision Making website, or go to NGA, the National Guardianship Association, or NDRN, the National Disability Rights Network. There are lots of places where there are lots of resources on sort of sample forms if you want to reduce it to a form. Really, the process looks something like this. It involves a support group, so a team, and that can be I call them integrated supports. So that can be family members, that can be friends, it can be professionals, and then of course, most importantly, that individual, right? And then making sure that that individual is instrumental in choosing the members. And then if that individual has people they trust, like I'm picturing you in your situation, your daughter trusts you, right? So so you might be able to recommend, here's some people I think you should have on your supported decision-making team, right? But and then the other thing that's really important in the process of developing a supported decision-making team per se, and keep in mind that team might be just one other person, the two of you are a team. It
Yeah.
might mean, in my sister's situation, it's mom, dad, an old social worker who no longer is her social worker, but just had a really great relationship with my sister, myself, my brother, my mom's friend Connie, who my sister chose to help my sister with money matters because my sister, she understands broad concepts. 20 is more than 10, 10 is more than 5.
Right.
She can't calculate, if it's $10.47, how much money does she get back? Well, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So we put things in place for that. But Connie, she knew, used to be the president of a bank. And Connie was a friend of my mom's. And for whatever reason, my sister had that gut. I want Connie on my team. So we asked Connie, you want to
Her.
be on the
She knows who
team?
her
Yeah,
people are.
she wanted to be
Yeah.
on the team. And I think we all have those people that our gut for whatever reason, right? We connect with those people. So really it's about the individual choosing who's on the team, and then also really empowering the individual to identify where are the areas that they need assistance. So where are the places I think I need assistance? And then who do I on my team want to assist me and support me with receiving information, with providing information, and then making the decisions that impact my life.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You have given us so much great information on supported decision making, both in your personal experience and just your wealth of knowledge on the topic with all of your background. Um, Talk a little bit really quickly before we wrap up about why you feel it's so important to, like the title of our webinar today, Empowering Choice and Honoring Individual Will.
Mhm.
Um, why is that so important?
Bec- I think it is part of just our foundational right, our human rights. When we talk about liberty and justice for all, we say our Pledge of Allegiance. When we talk about quality of life, when we talk about independence, when we talk about the pursuit of happiness, when we talk about community integration, um, really all of those fall under that umbrella of civil and human rights. And if we are really trying to create a world of we, not us and them, not the people and families who sort of have that, I call it the disability bubble. Those of us who are living within the disability bubble because we either identify as a person with a disability, or we are a family member, a parent, a loved one, or we work in that community, and then there's them, everybody else. And if we really are going to try to eliminate that us, them, and create a world where we live in we, then we really have to honor that idea, those ideals of liberty and justice for all, of what does the pursuit of happiness look like? What does it look like to live independently and in a community? It's about choice. It's about providing effective communication supports so that someone can express their will and preference, be supported in that dignity of choice, have trusted people around them to help them make those decisions and understand what the why of the decision, the consequences of the decision. And for me, it's really just about human rights. It's about creating equity for all so that we all can live in this beautiful world with the supports that we need that honor our own will and preference. And I always say this, like, how do you want to be treated? It's what I always say to the folks who are not living with the disability. If you were, and statistically, if we all grow old enough, we will all be in a place where we have some level of diminished capacity, where we need some help with decision making. How do you want to be treated? How do you want to live your life? How do you want to be supported? And so it's sort of up to the rest of us to make that happen.
Oh, so beautifully said. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You have given us so much to think about. I'm gonna right before I'm gonna get ready to talk a little bit about Caring Futures and what that offers in terms of classes. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we move into? I want to get to questions because I bet we got a lot of questions that people might want to ask you specifically about this. Any
You
last
bet.
thoughts?
Um, I don't think so. I'm really
Yeah,
thankful.
we covered it really well.
I
So I
really just
just
thank you, thankful for the opportunity and for the folks who joined us today. And certainly I welcome those questions. And I really just think that we're just sort of at the starting point right now, right? Of trying to figure it all out. And so I just really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation and answer some questions. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let's just talk a little bit about Caring Futures before we move on to questions. The Future is Now, designing a support plan for you and your adult family member, is a 6-week live online class series where caregivers develop a comprehensive future planning guide for the caregiver and their adult family member with a disability, all in a small and welcoming environment. Self-Care Matters, well-being for the caregiver, a 2-week live online class series where caregivers learn about and practice tips, resources, and strategies to improve and sustain their well-being. Future is Now and Self-Care Matters classes are also offered in Spanish. Visit the Caring Futures website at caringfutures.org and join our mailing list to keep up to date on these offerings and to register for classes and more. Also, if you want to continue this conversation, then I invite you to join the Caring Futures Facebook group. It's a private group only for family caregivers and is a safe space for us to share our triumphs and challenges. A link to the Facebook group will be posted in the chat right now. So thank you again, Elizabeth, for being here. Let's go ahead and move into questions. We're going to move into Q&A session. So please type your question in the Q&A feature, and we will answer you directly or call your question to the attention of the group. And our guest will answer you directly. If you would like to use ASL interpretation to ask your question, please raise your hand and request video access in the Q&A. So let's go ahead and see where our questions are. It looks like we have about 8 questions. Let's see here. So supported decision-making seems to be new, at least in San Diego. Families have been directed towards conservatorship. Now that we are learning that this should not have been the only choice, is there a way to reserve conservatorship or reverse conservatorship? Sorry, reverse.
It's a great question. And I will tell you that even here in Colorado, we've had a supported decision-making agreement statute. It's been law since 2021. And we just this year hosted what we called a supported decision-making summit, because what we realized is that most, particularly for transition age kiddos, right? So they're turning 18, they might still be in the education system, so they're kind of doing their transition years before they go in. And they were being told by the education system that conservatorship was the way to go. But they were also being told by pediatricians, by caseworkers, by sort of, all the professionals were gearing. And I think, unfortunately, it's not ill-intended people at all. In fact, I think it's well-intended people who are really wanting to make sure that particularly young adults with disabilities, particularly developmental disabilities or cognitive disabilities, are being supported and protected without realizing that there are other options. There is supported decision making. There are, Felisa, you mentioned that you guys have sort of an agency agreement, an agent agreement, which is a legally binding document, right? And it just requires that the individual have the capacity to be able to say, I know what these decisions are I need to make, and that's the person I want to make them, right? And it's a pretty low bar in most states. So here's what I would say. Is there a way to reverse it? Absolutely. So in most states, I don't know what the petitioning requirements are for California, but in most states, what you would do is you would file a petition for what they call a restoration or a removal of that guardian. But here's the key. In order to do that, you're going to need to be able to put on evidence that demonstrates that that conservatorship is no longer needed because a less restrictive alternative is available and would be sufficient in that unique circumstance. So it really is individual to that one person, but it's not an insurmountable thing to do, particularly if you believe that your person should not be in the court system, should not be a ward of the state, should not be, but really needs something else. And you are able to put those things in place. And so what I would encourage you to do is, if you are already in a guardianship or conservatorship, is adopt a supported decision-making model. Start documenting that, start building up a supported decision-making team, start giving the individual opportunities to make decisions with that supported decision-making team in place. Again, whether that's one person or 12 people. And then so that you can, and then document. So that if then at some point you decide to go back to the court to say, we didn't know this was the only this was not the only option. And we know with some level of certainty that something less restrictive will work in this individual circumstance, because under the law in almost every state, if a less restrictive alternative is adequate, then the individual actually would not even qualify to have a guardianship or conservatorship in place. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Yes, I think so. So Anna asks, many low-income parents in California, fearing that they won't be able to make healthcare choices for their young adult with intellectual disabilities when they turn 18 years old, go through the conservatorship court process, which costs them money they often don't have. Is there a document that can be downloaded and completed without the need to hire a paralegal or attorney or go through the court systems? And I think the answer to that is yes, because that's pretty much what my daughter and I have.
Can you share a little bit about that, Felisa, like how you got that document and sort of what that process was?
I can. I got that from the local Family Resource Center, and there's two parts to it. One is her appointing me to be her representative, and then the other part is just describing the types of decisions that she's given me permission to make. And medical decisions are a part of that. And for Lily is 24 now, and we've been using that ever since she turned 18. And it's not a document that needs to be notarized. It's simply a document where she has capacity to sign, and she basically makes a very, a check mark that looks like an L for Lily. And that's her signature. And it just basically says that she trusts me to make her decisions for her, whether they be financial decisions, medical decisions, benefit decisions. And I got that from our local Family Resource Center. So that is something that all of California has, if you're in California, has Family Resource Centers all around, and they'll know exactly what you need or can point you to the direction that you need for that kind of a form. But I think that answers your question, Anna. And then you also asked, does the supported decision-making document need to be notarized? Now, mine does not need to be notarized. It's just a form, but there might be, and Elizabeth might know the answer, there might be supported decision-making forms that do need to be notarized. I'm not sure.
So it depends on how the law reads in your state. But this is what I would say. Oftentimes, even if there's not a state-specific statute, if you have a supported decision making and you agreement, right, and you get it notarized, it often has more legal weight when you're presenting it to a third party. So, for instance, if I'm presenting it to a medical provider, or I'm presenting it to a financial provider or a benefits provider, if it's notarized, it just carries a little more weight that says there was a neutral person there who witnessed this happening, and it wasn't happening under duress. It wasn't happening with undue influence. Recognizing that they came to the table for me, it's almost like what you would do with a power of attorney. And so if I would follow, caveat here, I am not licensed in California. This is not legal advice. However, I would look to your power of attorney statute for some guidance to say, what is considered best practice and what is the law required for a power of attorney, because they function much the same. And I've had, and just let me say this because I think it's important here. I've had people say, oh, well, when I look at options and alternatives to guardianship, why wouldn't I just get a power of attorney if my loved one is able to enter into that kind of an agent agreement? Why wouldn't I just get that, whether that's for healthcare or financial management or whatever that looks like? And here's what I would say. A power of attorney, first, it's better than, because you can do it outside the court. It doesn't involve the court, doesn't involve annual reporting, all the things that conservatorship does. So and it can be amended. The difference is, in a supported decision-making model, the individual is the one ultimately making the decision. They are supported by other individuals who help them in making that decision. Whereas a power of attorney gives someone else the authority to make the decision. So there is a distinction.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's see. Are you looking at the questions? Are there any that are resonating with you that you feel like we should try to adjust before we run out of time?
Sure. I'm just scrolling down. Susan posted this question. Is it necessary to separate duties? Or can my sons name their trustee or fiduciary or attorney as professionals on the team? We have very limited family available to fill the roles. It's a great question. So ultimately, you want the people who are on that team to be selected by the person the team is being created for. Now, with this caveat, which is what I would say, because this is how we did it with my sister. We asked her who she would like. And then we explained to her, you're going to want somebody who's really good with money, who understands what a trust is, who understands how to manage bank accounts and how that fits together. And here's some folks we know that are involved in your life that may not necessarily be family, because sometimes they will be a paid support. Sometimes they will be a paid professional. And that's why we call them integrated supports. So for instance, my mom, or my sister rather, before my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, my sister wanted my dad to help her with money, but wanted my mom to help her with medical things, particularly female related medical things. Wanted it to be my mom. And then didn't really care who helped her with things like residential living. Where was, what was her placement going to be? What choice did she have in that? Could she work? If she wanted to work, where could she work? How much money could she make? How much money couldn't she make because it would interfere with her benefit? Like navigating all those systems. And so what we ended up with was what we call an integrated team. So yes, especially if you reduce it down to writing, you're going to want to just have an understanding, particularly among the team, about who is doing what, not to the exclusion of everyone else, but having a point of contact. So this person is really the person who handles money. This person's really the person who helps with medical care, those sorts of things. And then making them a combination of paid supports, family supports, friends, community supports. And then certainly what are the things the individual can do for themselves that they don't really need support, but they might need someone to sort of bounce things off of, right? They just want that piece. So I think the best model is integrated supports. I think it sets someone up with better protections as well, because there's more eyes and ears looking at different things. And I think that reduces the opportunity for fraud, exploitation, abuse, so all the things that we all worry about and that we see when there is just one person who is in charge of a person's everything, with very little oversight. Whereas when you have a team of people, to me, that creates more safety, not less safety.
Well, yeah, and more, yeah, more honor of their will too, right? Because there's going to be more people defending their point of view, or working together to ensure that their will is actually being exercised.
Felisa, I'll give you just a really quick example. I am on a supported decision-making team for a woman who is I think she's in her late 40s now, I think, in Missouri, and I live in Colorado. But it's somebody who I knew and I worked with quite closely. She was actually a board member at the Missouri DD Council, and her family created a supported decision-making team because they were worried that one of the siblings was going to try to file for guardianship once the parents passed. They were worried about that, and they didn't want her to become part of that system. And so they started a supported decision-making team. And so that team ended up being mom, dad, one of her siblings. They wanted me on the team because I'm licensed to practice law in Missouri, and they wanted somebody who just had some legal knowledge in the event they were going to have to defend against. In Missouri, it's a guardianship. They asked for someone who worked at the USED, and because she was a specialist on systems and advocacy and supports and like what were the services available in that area. So they asked her to be on that supported decision-making team. So none of us were doing direct supports, but we were all helping making decisions to piece it together. And we were all invited to the table because we had some kind of a relationship with her. And we only meet once a quarter now. We started out meeting once a month. But then we got a trust put in place. We got some power of attorney put in place. We reduced this supported decision-making team, like an agreement, we reduced it to writing so that we all sort of knew the role we played. And then since then, the person who was leading that effort, who was going to be the trustee on the trust, said, I just can't, I've got too much going on. I've moved since then. I'm overwhelmed. And what it made it easy to do was for us as a team to come together, have a meeting on Zoom and say, her name was Kathy, and say, Kathy, is there anyone else you would like to manage the money and manage the trust? And we were able to collectively come up with someone. And then we were able to make some of those phone calls on her behalf and identify a new person. And I think that's a really important thing to realize, is that a person's chosen supports or availability of supports isn't going to be the same for their entire life. So
Yeah,
it really is a
it can
living
change.
document.
It
It
can
evolves
evolve.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can evolve over time into something else. We have a lot of different questions here. I want to ask couple. Let's see. Leslie asks, we committed to using supported decision-making. The logistics have been a bit difficult. We had our son sign a power of attorney for medical and other suggested forms for financial and school, etc. Deemed not good enough by insurance company to speak for him. Social Security was also an issue. Our forms actually said if our doctor thinks we can't make the decision, use the agent. So they wanted info from the doctor. Do you have suggested forms that could make this process easier? Our son can verbally state who he wants to make help decisions, but is unable to navigate insurance, financial, government agencies, etc.
Um, First of all, I'm sorry to hear that, because I think it is challenging, and I'm also incredibly grateful to you for keeping going, right, and fighting that fight. And I think there is a learning curve here. This is not the first time I have heard particularly about Social Security or a medical provider or a financial institution saying, supported decision-making agreement or an agency agreement is not enough. And here's what I would say. Until a court has determined and issued an order that says a person is incapacitated, they can appoint anyone they want. Just because someone is receiving disability benefits, just because someone is receiving Medicaid, Medicare, SSI, SSDI, does not mean that they do not have the capacity to say, this is what I want, or this is who I want to make that decision for or with me. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think we, the collective, we have some work to do in educating what have been just sort of the traditional, oh, you're not the guardian, I can't talk to you. You're not the guardian, you can't have access to these things. You're not the guardian, you can't do, or conservator, right? I think there's an education gap that we need to address. To your question about, do I know of forms? I do not know of forms. And it might be worthwhile to contact your state protection and advocacy agency to see if they would either, one, create a form, or two, issue something on letterhead that states that supported decision making under Colorado or California law is a valid, whether that's a document, a practice, a what have you. But I'll give you an example. So I have not been deemed by a court of law to be incapacitated. So if I wanted to, I could walk into any office and say, I want Felisa to make these decisions for me. I want Felisa to be part of my decision-making process. I want Felisa to have access to X, Y, and Z. And that should be true for every individual who has not been deemed to be totally and completely incapacitated. I think we all know that capacity is not black and white. The ability to make decisions about certain things is different. I know my sister is able to say, I want me, my mom, my dad, my brother, Connie, she's able to say and understand this person's going to help me with medical, with financial, with this, right? But if you ask my sister if she wants to invest in Bitcoin, she has no idea. She doesn't know what Bitcoin is. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, capacity is not this black and white thing. You know, if you can't make these decisions, then clearly you can't make these decisions. Or if you have this diagnosis, then obviously you can't make these decisions. Like, no, that's not true.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, because I know what Leslie's talking about it, and I run into it all the time with my daughter at the hospital, right? Like, I'm allowed to make appointments for Lily, but I'm not allowed to cancel them. And it's the most ridiculous thing that I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And so they push me into this advanced directive thing. And I'm like, I understand that that's what you need, but that's a technicality that I'm not really required to provide. Lily's chosen me to represent her. And so we have the same battle, depends on who I get on the phone. But those kinds of obstacles, we face those when our kids turn 18 in all different places. And most of us are pointed in the direction of conservatorship because that takes the liability out of all the agencies that we have to deal. Like, so they can just make their job easier by us being conserved, right?
So I just looked it up, and I apologize for not looking it up prior to jumping on today, but I can see that supported decision-making law went into effect on January 1st of 2023 in Colorado, or in California. It says new sections enacting the supported decision-making law formalizes supported decision-making in order to reduce the number of people who might otherwise have their rights removed by conservatorship. Simply allowing disabled individuals to name trusted advisors, could be families, friends, and professionals, so forth and so on. So it sounds to me like there's an education gap, and anything that we can do, the collective we can do to fill that gap and make sure we're educating folks who are denying
I
supported
think I
decision.
would just print that off and carry it around with me.
Yeah, and I think it'd be worth, so just so you know, it's Assembly Bill 1663, went into effect on January 1st, 2023. And if I can do some digging, but I may just give a shout to your protection and advocacy organization and say, can you print a letter, a one-page, very clear explanation of what it is and what authority it carries? And I would carry that with you all the time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is an education thing. And, I hear from parents all the time the struggles that they go through with that. Now, I don't know how we've been so lucky to navigate, our lives. My daughter Lily and I, she's now, like I said, 24. So for the last 5 years, we've been able to manage. But every so often, I do run into a snag, where someone doesn't want to, acknowledge that she's chosen me. And I'm like, well, I have it right here, and I carry my form with me. And eventually they have to acknowledge it, but there is some resistance sometimes. So I think you're right. It's going to be us trying to, um, just create awareness and educate people.
And I will tell you too, this is not unique to California. Across the nation where supported decision making has been passed into law, folks are struggling with what we call third parties, getting other professionals to recognize it as a legally binding document or a legally binding practice and honoring it. I think it's relatively new, and I think it's just going to take some time.
Well, thank you so much for explaining what it is and what it is not, and giving us some context about how we can use that in our lives. I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to need to wrap up. But I'm trying to see here. We have so many that we didn't get to. I think some of them sort of answer, like if we could answer one, we could answer several. Um, Everyone's asking for the document now.
I need a form. You know what? And I'm happy to help you get one that is the California specific. I work with my PNA here quite closely, and I'm happy to have them do some reaching out and say, "Listen, we just got off a call with the ARC California, and we need something."
That would be great. Yeah, no, we could do that, and then maybe we can send it out to our registrants, just to have for an FYI, because it may be. I think someone did ask, is it something that they need to contact an attorney for? And I think the answer is yes or no, right? Like you mentioned that it might hold a little more weight, but it's not actually legally necessary. But getting it notarized, I really heard what you said there. It does actually give it a little more of a formal feel, and that might put the agency that you're presenting it to at ease, to be a little more open to it.
And I want to add this too, Felisa. My parents, to me, when I look back, they were practicing building a supported decision-making team when my sister was in middle school. And let me tell you what that looked like. It was Sunday, it was about once or maybe twice a month after church. We went to a congregational church because I came from my family, we're kind of a hodgepodge. But after church, my mom would invite everyone over for lasagna. And people would sit around the table, and they started building relationships with my sister, talking about my sister, getting people invested in who she was and how she functioned. And they were doing it. And when I look back, I go, oh, they started building a supported decision-making team.
A long time
And
ago. Yeah.
it was just come over for brunch. Like it doesn't. So I want to make sure that your listeners know it doesn't have to be when you get started. It doesn't have to be some formal process where you sit down with a bunch of forms and you really just need to vet where does the person need and want support. And then who are the folks that that individual wants and needs to have in place to be the most successful.
That's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for all you've shared with us today, Elizabeth. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to every single question today. We'll do our best to put together a resource document that we can add, and put it on our website as well, so that we can continue to have this conversation. But thank you all for joining us today. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the conversation. Have a great day, everyone.